a conductive wire, and you were so electric. I had no say when you came so near, and just passed right through me.
Hey everyone, welcome to Geekdom is back. Today we are doing another roundtable episode, this time all about Spider-Man Far From Home. We have a slightly different lineup today, so joining me are Katie Schaefer, Jonathan Lally, and Tim Matthews. All of them have been on the podcast before, so you've possibly heard them, and Katie and Jonathan were on the Avengers Endgame roundtable, so if you haven't listened to that, I highly recommend doing that first, because we're going to be talking about that a little today. But how are you guys doing?
Great.
Fantastic.
I'm fantastic as well. I'm really, honestly, really, really pumped because I very much enjoy getting on this podcast, but also loved speaking with Katie last time because she is the ultimate fan. So I'm pumped to be on and pumped to meet Tim. So it's nice to meet you, Tim.
Hey, it's great to meet everybody. I'm super stoked to be on my first of the roundtables. Although I thought we were talking about Spider-Man 3, the greatest Spider-Man of all time. So I'm a little disappointed.
Hey, it's still available if you want it, Tim.
Oh, I'll take it.
I feel like Tim is like turning around doing the emo Tobey Maguire dance out of here.
Yes! With the head toss, his hair.
I'm doing it right now.
And there goes Tim. Awesome. Well, let's dive in and first talk about our viewing experience with this, because I think there are at least 4 different ways you could have watched this movie, between Dolby IMAX, probably 3D, and just plain old digital. So, Katie, I know you went to a press screening, so I'm guessing you happen to just have a regular old press screening for that.
Oh, no. So press screenings are very dependent on where they're going to show the movie. And this press screening, thankfully, was at one of the premiere theaters, the Icon theaters in my area. And they had a whole theater full of regular people who win from like the radio and stuff. And then there's an upper level where they give seats to all the press members.
Oh,
and
fancy.
I've been doing this long enough that the press girls will give me decent seats. And so I was sitting in just the perfect spot. And though that theater has the Dolby sound, and it was phenomenal. Like just the intensity and the immediacy of the sound and the audio and the video were great to watch. It was ideal screening material.
Nice. Jonathan, how about you?
I think I've hyped Alamo Drafthouse plenty of times, but we usually go see it at Alamo. This was no different. We went to Alamo Drafthouse on the Tuesday night. Usually the screenings are on Thursdays, so this is different for me. But we usually have a group of like 15 or more people, and that was no different this time. I just really love getting that Mondo pint glass swag that they give out. You know, you just have to pay a little bit extra and get some really cool stuff. So I got some pins and, but usually those first screenings are like the biggest of the fans at least in San Francisco, going to the Alamo, and it's a lot of fun. And then ultimately I ended up seeing it again, like 2 days ago, I guess. Okay. At the Metreon, not in the IMAX, but in the Metreon, and we paid for those like recliner seats, and then of course got there and the recliners were broken.
No.
Oh no.
Yeah, that was kind of a bummer, because like the thing with the Alamo is like, I love going for the atmosphere and like the swag that you can buy, but the seats are like, they leave a lot to be desired. They can barely recline.
Yeah.
But they also have a lot of room between them so the people can go in and out and take your orders the whole movie. And that never really bothers me. It bothers some of my friends. They don't like having the folks, running past them the whole ways, but they usually do it pretty quietly that it doesn't bother me. But overall, the experience in both was really good. I especially at the Alamo, seeing it with those other folks, the very first showing that you can get, it's always really exhilarating.
Nice. Tim, I know you also saw it twice. So did you see it in the same format both times, or did you mix it up?
I mixed it up. I will forever support Jonathan's hype of Alamo Drafthouse.
Same.
Yeah.
Same.
I unfortunately just
I have never
outside
been.
Yeah.
Oh, it's amazing.
You just killed a sponsorship potential.
Oh, it's amazing, Deanna. You have to go.
That's right. The three of us can pick up the slack more. To
Well,
get
one
Deanna
just
the
opened.
sponsorship.
Sorry to cut you off. One just opened in L.A., so we're gonna have to make a trip out there, and we can all go see a movie together and take her.
Yes.
That's awesome.
I'll make
yeah,
some
Let's do
vacation
that.
plans.
That's awesome. Yeah. So I'm just outside Philly, and we unfortunately don't have an Alamo Draft House, and it's like I'm always just kind of like, why? Like, I feel like Philly's a good place for it.
I agree.
But I did see Spider-Man Homecoming, actually. I went out to Denver, Colorado for my 30th birthday. And one of the things I told my friends when we went, I was like, there's an Alamo Draft House in Denver. I was like, I have to go. I have to experience this place. Yeah. And guess what? Spider-Man Homecoming's coming out while we're there. And so,
no joke, when I went to Denver, did the same thing.
Yes. And it was amazing. They unfortunately were all out of the Mondo glasses for Spider-Man.
Right.
But he was like, yeah, I'm sorry we're out of the Spider-Man ones, but we have this Jaws one here. I'm like, oh, hell yeah. Give me that Jaws one. I'll take that.
Oh, yeah. I have the Jaws one where it's like the mechanical shark.
Yes, it's so cool. I'm drinking out of it right now.
Yeah, their stuff is awesome. Sorry, on behalf of Deanna Mondo and Alamo, if you're listening, big fans.
Yes, yeah.
Fly out Deanna to any of your locations so she can experience.
Absolutely. It's awesome. But for Far From Home, I just saw the first time I saw it on Tuesday night at just a United Artists with it's a nice theater. They got the really nice, recliners and everything. But then this morning I went at 9, and the first time I saw it, obviously on Tuesday, full packed house, very responsive crowd. So that was very exciting. People were cheering and laughing at all the right parts. So that's always an exciting experience. And then this morning, I love, as Deanna said, she went and saw this, and this was her first Dolby. So I have the AMC Stubbs pass. So I went to the Dolby nearby at 9:30 this morning, and I absolutely love the Dolby screenings. Like, it's the subwoofer that's just under your seat, and the pictures and the sound quality is fantastic. So
it's so good.
Yeah, I really enjoy that. So that was great. But it also being 9:30 in the morning, a much smaller crowd than the opening night. But still, it was great nonetheless.
Yeah, I went at 9:30 in the morning as well, actually, and my theater was packed because it was opening day, and I sort of got the last seat up in one of the top corners.
Oh, thank God, not the front corner.
Yeah.
Exactly.
No, it was all the way in the back, and I didn't realize sort of how high up the seats were going to go, because this is the only theater with the recliner seats in the AMC that I go to. And I was walking, and then I couldn't recline my seat all the way because I was too short to see over the next row.
Yeah. Oh, I know that struggle, girl.
We need a booster seat.
I know. It is like my
I'm
legs
short
already
as
don't
well,
touch the
so.
ground on those seats
I need that
anyway.
pillow, though.
Yeah, I should have brought a pillow to sit on. So I slightly reclined it, but for the most part, I just sort of left the seat up, which I didn't mind because they're more comfortable than the normal theater seats anyway.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
They got the thing in the middle. If you're lucky, you can get yourself a little it's like a love seat if nobody else is in the theater.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it when that happens.
It's great.
It's the little things.
Oh yeah, and I'm super weird with the Dolby theater. It's like I in the amount of times that I've gone, I've found my perfect spot.
Nice.
And it's seat F10.
Oh, it's beautiful when you find it. It's
Yeah,
like,
You can't see me, but I'm
home.
writing that down, so I'm going to see if it
F10 is
translates
great.
here.
It's
F10.
because it's not too close and not too far, but it's just right, so the screen it's in your perfect view.
There's been more than one time where I have all right, we'll sit here. Nope, this doesn't work. Let's move back. Let's move back a row and sit here. Okay, this is it.
Yeah.
This is good.
And now that I have that seat, when I'm looking online and I'm I could stop and see a movie, on the way home from work, and let's see what's showing. Oh, something's in Dolby. And I'll look it up, and F10's taken. And I'm like, nope, not seeing that movie.
Bad omen.
Yeah, for reference, I was in seat K1, last row.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
All the way in the K's.
I mean,
it was
that's
fine.
definitely better than all the way in the front.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was a kid, I used to sit all the way in the front, before back issues were a part of my life, and never again. So,
Oh yeah. Well, Deanna and I talked about it on the Toy Story podcast when my dad and my brother and I went it was after we just heard that like our neighbors had gotten back. They were like, this movie's amazing. We're like, oh, we should go this afternoon, not realizing how packed it was going to be. And obviously this is
The original.
The original. There's no there's no reserve seating, and we were all the way in the front, all the way on the left.
I feel like
And-
explaining non-reserved seat theaters and dial-up is like going to be this generation's come around Grandpa's lap, you know, tell the story. Sorry.
All good.
These large plastic bricks that we used to put in a machine and it would play.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like we all had pretty good viewing experiences with this. And even though I am short and needed to keep the seat not reclined, it was fine. I enjoyed it. The theater had a pretty good vibe. I wouldn't say anyone was particularly loud, but you did get some laughs and things like that. So I want to start the main discussion with how this is as a follow-up to Endgame, because Endgame was something that felt so final with that phase of the MCU that it's like, oh, but wait, we have one more and then the phase is really over. And I think, you know, it's just one of those things where because of how big Endgame was, it was hard to really determine what kind of impact Spider-Man Far From Home was going to have. And I think they kind of did a nice job of just making it this bridge from one to the other as far as the phases go. So what did you guys all think of how this was as a follow-up?
I was super impressed with how well they handled that. They take that initial moment to explain away the whole, this is why high school is the way it is now, which I was really hoping they would do.
I remember we were all hoping.
Yes, exactly.
They took care of that right away.
Yeah.
Yes. And they do it well and they brush it out of the story and we're all okay. Like, all right, great. That's good. Let's move along. And then they really address Peter's, you know, what we would imagine at least to be Peter's, you know, emotional impact from Endgame, then take it further. So I really enjoyed that. I thought they handled that particular aspect of it incredibly well, especially in regards to how Peter reacts to Mysterio. I thought that was by far and away the most natural way that someone like Peter would react to the character of Mysterio coming into his life.
For me, you know, I thought it was a really nice palate cleanser, very similar to the way that Ant-Man and the Wasp following up Infinity War felt. And I know I've talked about my love for Ant-Man here before, but I felt like a lot of the things that movie benefited from, same with Spider-Man Far From Home. It was a little bit smaller in scale. It focused more on story and characters rather than the spectacle, which absolutely worked in Endgame because we had built up to that. You know, it was Spider-Man. If you think about it, really, this is what, 1, 2, 3, like fifth film now, I guess. You got Civil War, Homecoming, Infinity War, Endgame, and now this one. And I like that they're spending more time developing these characters. I felt like what we saw here wasn't overbearing as far as the ramifications from the end of Endgame. They weren't like smacking us over the head with it. It
doesn't feel like it takes up too much time.
Exactly. It was perfect. I remember pretty much one of the things I said when we had spoken about Endgame is I said they can solve the one issue I took away with Peter and Ned being old, you know, young, and all these other kids have grown up and all the kids that they've shown in the trailer, you know, with one piece of dialogue or even a joke. I was hoping it would be a joke, and we got that type of stuff.
I thought about that when I watched the movie. I was like, he was totally right. Thank God.
I was so happy. I will say that, you know, what we'll discuss later with those cliffhangers, they set up a lot of possibilities for the MCU going forward with so many questions. And I am really excited to see where it goes.
I completely agree with everything said, you know, already. And as much as obviously I thoroughly enjoy the grand spectacle of Endgame, like you said, we built up to that. It was incredibly worth everything that we got. But a lot of my favorite stuff in the MCU tends to be when it's a little more scaled back and as the movies just kind of work on their own as just one. And that was something that I was a little bit nervous about with this movie. going into it, because I was like, like Homecoming was really great, and now we're getting, yes, it's a follow-up to Homecoming, but it's also a follow-up to Endgame. And I'm like, is it going to feel like a Spider-Man movie, or is it going to feel like a coda to Endgame? And I feel like they did do a really, really nice balance between the two. It still felt contained while also building the world. And its response to Endgame, they hit the emotional beats perfectly. With the conversations with between Peter and Quentin. The conversation, was it Quentin?
Quentin Beck, right?
Quentin Beck, yeah.
Mysterio?
Yep.
Yeah. And so the conversations between them, and the conversations especially between him and Happy, like you were getting the emotional impact of the repercussions of Endgame. But then the whole thing, that how they call it like the blip, and the way they framed it in, with the really lousy student, TV channel.
That was
thing.
wonderful.
It was fantastic. And
So cute.
yeah, I loved it. And the fact that it's like, you get this feeling that there's not a huge emotional impact for a lot of like the students of the blip. Like, it's almost like they treat it like an annoyance.
Yes.
Like, it's just like seriously, like my younger brother's now 5 years older than me, and Betty's just like, yeah, that's math. Like,
Yeah.
I love, like, there's such this feeling of like, teenagerhood.
Yeah.
Like that 14, 15-year-old age. And that part, I was like, John Watts, chef kiss.
It was
man.
it was the perfect way to respond to Endgame, like you guys said, without really sitting on it too much. You were able to feel everything that came from Endgame, but it felt right in this world, in this playful, fun teenager way. And that's exactly what I wanted from a Spider-Man movie.
Yeah, they knew they needed to address Endgame in some way, but this movie didn't necessarily hinge on the events of Endgame. It hinged more on Peter being able to grow as a person. And, this kind of leads right into our next topic here on Peter's grief and how it led him to make the decisions that he made throughout the movie. And obviously not great decision making on Peter's part, but
You had one job, dude.
I think what some people forget is that, he's in high school. How many of us made stupid decisions when we were in high school? Anyone who says they didn't is probably lying. So
Yeah.
Stupid
I was
They're a
decisions
liar.
last
And-
week.
Or the most uptight person ever.
yeah. And, they're like, well, Peter's so much smarter. And look, I went to an extremely nerdy high school where like freshmen were taking calculus and then the next year going over to the college campus to take math. So trust me, I understand nerdy kids. And even if they're book
still
smart,
dumb.
yes, they're still in high
They're
school and they
so
still
dumb.
make dumb
Yeah.
decisions,
The book
People
smarts
were-
don't make up for the street smarts.
It's like expecting
yeah.
a first grader to do math at an 8th grade level on an emotional perspective.
Yeah.
They don't know what they're doing. Just give them some slack.
Yeah, so it sounds like we're all sort of on the same page here with how they handled Endgame and Peter's grief from the events of Endgame. And I just think that was something that, while not everyone is going to like this movie because Spider-Man is one of the biggest Marvel characters ever, there are a lot of people who have very, very strong opinions of this character because they've been reading the comics for so long. And yes, they do take things and twist them a little from the comics, as they've done with pretty much every MCU movie. But I totally agree with Jonathan, too. At the same time, this was a good palate cleanser for what's coming next. We got this fun European adventure, even though it still was emotional, and Peter had to work through a lot of different feelings, not only about Tony, but about him as a hero, about MJ, about literally anything a high school kid would be worried about.
Yeah, and just one thing I wanted to touch on, because we brought it up just while it's fresh in my brain. Even though, as you said, we didn't hinge on the snap and the decimation and the blip, I still think that we will see things be, whether it's a enemy that comes as a result of it, whether it's the X-Men being introduced as a result of like the snap, and all of this crazy stuff happening. I still think we will see it show up, but it will be in more of a serious, maybe it's a new character, something like that. I mean, they have a lot of possibility for that still, but I'm glad that they didn't hinge on it. And as far as Peter's grief goes, it obviously got the better of him in this film and ultimately made him vulnerable. He tried to distract from that grief by leaving his suit and his responsibilities at home. But like many of us can attest, your problems tend to follow you around until they're addressed. And that happens in a spectacular fashion here, whether it's him leaving his suit, his mom packs his suit. He ghosts Nick Fury. Nick Fury basically diverts his whole summer vacation. It's like,
at every
can't
turn.
win.
Shout out to Dimitri.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I thought
Props.
that this was such a great exploration of Peter's grief while also bringing us through a new story. Like, Peter is unique in the MCU because he was Iron Man's protege. He is not a fellow fighter like Black Widow or...
Hawkeye?
Yes, thank you. That's exactly who I was thinking of. Or Hawkeye or anything like that. He is younger and he took his inspiration from Iron Man, and now he has to find his own inspiration and be an inspiration to other people. And that's a lot to ask. Like, I think he says he's 15 or 16 in this movie.
Yes, I forget which one.
I think he's
but one of
16.
those, yeah.
Yeah, like
He's
that
16
is.
at this point.
I remember 16, and I remember having no goddamn idea what I was doing at that age.
Yeah.
I still don't know what I'm doing. Let's
Like
be honest here.
16? That you're a baby. You are a baby. And no judge for that because we were all babies once. But expecting to lay that burden on someone that young and know how to make the right choices is way beyond the pale. And that's why I can totally understand Peter's reaction to all of the events of this film. I get it.
Well, also to touch on that, like, it's crazy when you think about the event. Like, there was one point where someone said, like, are the Avengers even a thing anymore? What's going on?
Yeah.
And it's like,
Right.
You're right. You're like, wait, Cap's out of the picture, Iron Man's out of the picture, Hawkeye's out of the picture, Black Widow's out of the picture. Like,
Right. Who is it?
this is like, they're kind of in disarray. And I love when Nick Fury is like, I came back 5 years, no intel. Like, you're all I have. He's literally relying. He's like, I can't get a 15-year-old kid to return my calls, but like, I don't think you understand how serious this is. Like,
Right.
we don't have people anymore.
I love how it deals with Endgame and Peter's grief in that it acknowledges both of them as something very real and very affecting to the events that happen afterwards. Because obviously Peter would never have made the choice he does with Mysterio if Tony were still there. He wouldn't have had that option. But he does because he's like, oh, great, I can shove this responsibility onto an adult. I don't have to deal with this.
Exactly.
And it's funny. It's like a contrast to how he was. It's a stark contrast to how he was, no pun intended,
Nice.
in
Yes.
Just lean in.
Homecoming.
That was intended.
Yeah, like,
I like it. I like
after the fact, I'm good with it. Yes, but it's it's very different than how he was in Homecoming, where he wanted to rush in and he wanted to take charge and he wanted to be involved.
Right.
And now he's like, oh God, can't I just go back to being how you guys wanted me to be?
Right,
You
he
know?
understands the gravity of taking on that emotional responsibility.
Yeah.
And so when it's forced on him, because Tony probably didn't plan for this to happen at least 10 years, 10, 15 years out from this.
Yeah.
But it's happening. And so now he has to deal with it and he has to step up and he has to be the leader. And like, can he do that? And I think that's kind of the question that this movie was asking is, can Spider-Man at this age and at this developmental level step up and be this person for the MCU?
Yeah. Katie, you touched on the fact that Spider-Man was Iron Man's protege. And like we see when it's the little fundraiser for the homeless.
Yes,
and,
that's so cute.
And he's like, you know, he does his little appearance, but then it's like when everyone's barraging him with all these questions, are you an official Avenger now? Are you a top Avenger? Are you going to take over for Tony Stark? Are you the new Iron Man? And it's like, he was Tony's protege and he looked up to him. He was this father figure that he needed. And he never in his train of thought was like, oh, I'm going to train under Tony and become the next Iron Man. It was just him in the moment working with this guy that he idolizes.
It was him being a science nerd.
Exactly. He takes advantage of the moment and he doesn't really think about what comes after.
Right.
Yeah, and so him dealing with that, it's I agree. Like I think just the way he latches on to Mysterio, it makes total sense. And I mean, come on, like I know we're all sitting there watching it, and you know, at least for me, it's like a part of me was like, I know he's going to turn out to be a bad guy because that's Mysterio. But at the same time, like Jake Gyllenhaal, like the way he's playing him, I'm just like, no, I want you to be his friend. Like, I want you to like take him under your wing and help
He
him
seems
out. Like,
so responsible. Like I'd believe him as an adult. I am almost 35 and I'm a fucking accountant and do like very normal everyday tasks. And I too would be like, oh, good. This is somebody who I can give these tasks to and they'll take care of it. And then,
Yeah.
It's all
Yeah,
wrong.
and you know, that's Peter's big downfall in this movie. He decides to trust Mysterio with the one thing that Tony really truly leaves behind for him. You know, he gets these sunglasses and he has no idea what he needs to use them for until he realizes, oh, there's this AI in here. And the AI is so powerful, I think even beyond what we had seen previously. And Tony is always tinkering. So I know some people were kind of wondering what happened with Friday and the other AI in Peter's suit from Homecoming. But I sort of just chalk that up to Tony was being Tony and he had 5
agree.
years
Yeah.
to work on other stuff because
Yep.
he was still here. And he just went all out with it. So to have that be Peter's downfall is handing Edith over to Mysterio, really just wanting to have this trust in him. You know, we kind of get
It's
that
so
moment.
perfect.
Yeah, we get that moment too, though, where after Peter leaves, we're kind of like, oh boy, is this where it's going to happen? And Jake Gyllenhaal plays the character so well because you look at him, like you said, Katie, and you just want to trust him. You know, it's Jake Gyllenhaal. What's not to trust?
He's a charmer. He's a
Oh,
charmer.
Right.
all
Gyllenhaal.
hail the Gyllenhaal.
Yeah,
I
that
agree.
whole family.
Yeah, exactly. Maggie, just as good.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you watch Gyllenhaal, he brings this gravity and this sense of security to the role. And then, like, personally, I really love Jake Gyllenhaal because he can go from, like, very serious, intense to what the fuck is wrong with this guy? Like, I don't know how many of you saw Oakjaw, but
I haven't seen that one.
I haven't
saw
seen.
Nightcrawler.
Oh wait, no. Yes, I did see. Yes, he's eccentric and crazy in that one too.
he at Oakjaw, if
The
you haven't
Netflix,
seen it,
the Netflix
Yes,
CGI
exactly.
like pig.
yep.
Yeah, it was a crazy movie.
You watch that just for Jake Gyllenhaal because he takes all of the normal intensity he brings to every role and twists it into this crazy what the hell is wrong with you person. And that is what I saw in Mysterio. This is a much more toned down version of his character in that, but like he goes from being this very trustworthy, stable seeming man to, and then he gives that speech at the restaurant and you're like, oh God, this guy is nuts.
Yeah.
The switch when he knows Peter's gone and he just like the look on his face changes and he's just like, was that so hard? Like,
Yeah,
and you're just
that
like,
was
oh
great.
man.
Exactly.
Like,
Exactly.
You knew it was coming, and this really just was pitch perfect casting. I always thought Gyllenhaal was, personally for me, I thought he was snubbed for at least an Oscar nomination for his work in Nightcrawler.
Like 3.
I thought
Yeah.
Agreed.
I thought Nightcrawler is honestly one of the greatest movies and one of the greatest roles he's ever done. And Quentin Beck certainly had bits of that character blended in with a more of a thespian who was obsessed over all of the details. And
Yeah.
that was so great to me when he was addressing the cast, and you're just like, wow, like,
amazing.
because I'm not familiar with a lot of the comics. Spider-Man, I know I've said this to Katie and Deanna before, but my limited experience growing up, I maybe read one or two Spider-Man comics, but mostly X-Men, and only recently got back into comics. But what I know of the character Mysterio is that he's all about, sleight of hand and illusions, and like, I love
Presentation.
that presentation.
He's into presentation.
And I love that they made him like I said, this thespian, this like guy who's like a theater dude who's obsessed with all the details, and the scene where he's revealing all of his connections to Tony Stark with the past movies. But my favorite moment of all of that, where he's showing off all these people and he turns to the guy who's the screenwriter and he says something like, apparently this type of crazy stuff is exactly what people want to hear. Is like,
yeah,
where he's talking about Earth and like all the different Earth and the multiverse. And I will say this, shouts to some of the people on the chorus message boards and comment section that called pretty much that we were not going to have a multiverse, that this was, or at least not in this film. They just kind of mentioned it and made it kind of a joke. But I thought he was great. I thought that we got exactly what we needed out of that character, and I hope he's not gone. I really hope he's not gone.
I agree, and it's so like I'm a big fan of the Mysterio character in the comics, and like it exactly like he is a I believe in the comics it fluctuates slightly here and there, but overall like he's someone who is like a special effects artist.
He's a special effects artist, yeah.
And and when I saw like in the previews that they were doing this like hero thing with him and everything, I was like, oh man, are they taking him away from that? But they built this extra oomph of his character with, tying it into Tony and tying it into the, and I know with the MCU, it is kind of getting a little tiring of
all the retconning.
Yep.
Retconning, but also like just it's like, of course it's in response to something Tony did. Like I do think now we need to start moving away from that. I think this is like the best like last one to do with a response to Tony. Yeah,
Yep.
like it was done so
Hard
well. It was really funny.
That was great.
It'll get tiresome if they keep going with it.
Exactly.
Though. Totally agree.
And especially now that he's dead. Spoilers. But the way that they still kept like that, as you guys were saying, the theatricality to him and everything, the way he's commanding his crew and directing people like on set when they're working through everything, like they fit the core of his character in with this new storyline, and they did it so well. And they even did the way they worked it out. It had this kind of almost meta feeling to the state of movies right now, that it's like when he gives his big speech and he's talking about that, like nobody cares like what you have to say unless you have big lasers and a cape and everything. All I'm sitting here and thinking is I'm just like, he's talking about just all the in a meta way, the superhero movies that are making all the money, and then like the indie movies and original IPs that no one gives a crap about. And it's like, and
I saw this the same week as Midsummer. So that did not hit me the same way.
I still
need to see. I cannot
amazing.
wait for Midsummer.
Definitely see it.
I almost stole a Midsummer poster at AMC because it was on the table, and I was like, I feel like that's for free, but I don't know. It feels like they just left
You're
it there
a good
by
soul.
accident.
We need more of you.
But it's
I would have jacked it.
Oh yeah, I would have supported that too.
I would have jacked it too.
Yeah, like just the way they worked his whole storyline with it. It felt like this great nod to just the state of the industry, but also within the universe. And then it also even felt almost meta to the crazy directors that Jake Gyllenhaal has worked with, that he now gets to lash out at all his actors and everything.
He does. It's so great.
And he does it
Velvet
so well.
Buzzsaw alone.
Yes.
Yeah, he was the director from Hell in that moment, pointing the drones at their foreheads and basically like, get it right.
Yeah.
Like, get it right or pay the price. But it was also like, I like how they took, like what you said, he's like a special effects person, but then you took the modern twist. That's what I've always loved about this iteration of Spider-Man, is like they're all kids and they go to a tech school, and like Flash is not a white kid and MJ is not a white chick. It's like everyone is different, and they've updated it where it's like all the drones are doing the effects. All of the drones are making
there's no
what's
magic
going on. There's no magic, and it's like actually really like we can get to the more later, which I'll talk about. But like they felt like so current. This film, in a lot of ways, down to even the cliffhanger at the end, in a lot of ways, felt like very current and modern.
I completely agree.
Yep.
I also like how they just have him walking around like he's in a green room the entire time, pretty much.
He's in a mocap suit. He's in a mocap suit.
Yeah, that was like super meta.
He's so good in this.
Yeah, no, he owns it like completely.
How we doing on that cape? How we doing on that cape?
I'm literally hours from possibly shaking hands with the queen. I need those wrinkles now.
Oh, yes.
Yes!
Oh, that line was great.
Yeah, and the dynamic between Mysterio and Peter the entire time, too, it changes based on the circumstances, but it still works so well when Peter is very trusting of him, and even when he's not, when he's realized everything that's happened. And you just have these moments where you're kind of like, oh, okay, the dynamic has clearly changed, but it didn't affect the chemistry between the two characters in a bad way. And, you know, obviously there's more chemistry to talk about in this movie because you then have the Peter and MJ storyline. And, you know, we all knew this was coming, but it's still so awkward and lovable.
Yeah.
Oh my
I love
God. I loved Peter and MJ.
Yeah.
That was something I was so ready for, honestly. Like, the MCU has had this long series of very sad, tragic relationships. Even when you get into, like, Iron Man and Pepper Potts, it gets very emotional and very tragic because no one can come between, you know, the superhero and their calling and all of that. And then there's MJ.
And she's not just a prop either, kind of like how we
No.
feel with Jane and Thor's relationship at first, and then, you know, you have things going on with Black Widow and Bruce, and, you know, you kind of have these relationships that I feel didn't necessarily work, but then when you have the ones like Tony and Pepper and Peter and MJ that just work because they let the women be themselves, it just feels so much better. And that's what this really felt like. You know, MJ was very much still MJ, and she was smart enough to figure out who he was.
I love
so
that.
well done. So
I
well
love
done.
that she was just like, yeah, I figured it out.
And then when she finds out, she's like, "Wait, I was right."
I was right.
I was
the
only
whole
like
time.
67% sure.
Yeah.
Yes. And Zendaya's performance has to be 100% applauded here because she is just such a perfect MJ. Because like
really is.
I've read lots and lots and lots of Spider-Man comics, and MJ is never like the goody two shoes, like bright happy girl. She is always very sarcastic and at times caustic to Spider-Man, and Zendaya really personifies that. And I thought how they explore that in this one, where she's just like, so you're Spider-Man. I know. Oh shit, I'm right. You are Spider-Man? Oh God.
What do I do with this information? How do I unpack?
Right. But she still likes him. She still has that nerdy, like, oh, but I like you. Hey, how's it going? No, you know, there's so much fun going on.
They were adorable to watch them flirt and
Definitely.
like not even realize they were flirting. But
Yes.
like I for me to watch it, yeah, she's fantastic, and she's just fantastic in pretty much everything. I haven't seen her in much,
Anything
but the
she
things
does,
I've
she's
seen
fun.
her in, I'm watching Euphoria right now, and she's just so good.
I need to
Dude,
start
I
that.
saw, what was it? Small Feet?
I haven't seen that yet.
The horrific Yeti children's
yeah.
movie. And she's good even in that.
She
And that's
like can
not
polish a
good
turd,
movie.
basically, is what you're
Yes,
saying.
she's
Yeah, like,
still fun.
She yeah, she's great. And like you said, you know, in what I've seen of her character in the comics, what I've seen of her, I love the Spider-Man PlayStation game. Shouts to that game, is so fun. And
I was playing it before we started recording.
her character in the
Good
game,
game.
and what I love about her character is that she rushes into action. She's, like you said, not a prop. She is very much like sneaking around, helping out, like, you know, driving, like basically giving Spider-Man his intel and a lot of stuff. Like, she's very much, I think of Spider-Man as like Mary Jane and Spider-Man is like a buddy cop almost sometimes, you know, like they're
Right,
really
like from
both,
The Thin Man.
yeah, like
If we're going to go back to way old times, like The Thin Man with his wife Nora.
exactly,
where
yeah. Oh wow,
They're investigators together.
exactly. It's like a team. It's a group effort, and Peter very much needs her. Like, I feel like Peter needs her more than she needs him at
Oh,
any
absolutely.
given time. Like,
Totally.
he swings in to save at the end of the day, you know, at the very last
he
moment
almost has
sometimes, but like
No idea what's going on.
he's
where
clueless.
She's like, let me just explain this
she's
out
his,
to you.
you
This is
know,
what's
he's got the
happening.
spider sense, but she's his eyes. you know, and
she's his cue.
yeah, and you know, I like that she challenges his intellect. I like that she isn't happy sitting on the sidelines, that she's a woman of action, and that's, you know, something like you said, you know, they're very few and far in this universe. Even though these films are a lot of fun, like, you know, there's certain weak points in any movie, and it's, I don't know if we've gotten anything quite like Pepper Potts and Tony yet, and this is just watching them unfold on screen was just, you know, delightful.
Absolutely. Like their chemistry, the awkward chemistry, it feels so natural. It feels so true to just themselves and their age. You know, even when she you know, says like, you're Spider-Man and everything, and then he says to her, you know, wait, were you only watching me because you thought I was Spider-Man?
Yeah.
And you can tell like she wants to say no, like I like you, but she's an awkward teenager, and
Right?
like,
So she's like, yeah, totes, that's
yeah,
it.
why else would I watch
I
you?
swear.
And then, you know, later, you know, she obviously, you know, comes clean. But yeah, like the two of them are just so fun together. Their back and forth is amazing. Like I could just watch an entire movie of them just hanging out.
Even their kiss is awkward and
Yeah.
adorable. Like
Yeah.
the fact that, like, you know, they kind of like, oh, peck first. Oh, okay, cool. Like such teenagers.
Yeah, it's just like, oh, that just happened. And then, yeah. And yeah, like her being like the you know, like a person of action, you know, grabbing the mace and, you know, trying to help out. And then when she rushes to see, you know, if Peter's okay, and then he's okay, you know, she still tries to play it off cool, like, oh, you know, I
Brought this in
brought
case I
this
could help.
thing, you know, in case I could help, you know. They're trying to shield the I was terrified that like we were both gonna die. You know, it's
She's very strong.
yes, yeah. And she was fantastic in Homecoming, and it's like I'm totally okay with her being MJ because she's perfect as MJ. Obviously her name is Michelle and her name is not Mary Jane, but who cares? Who cares? I'll say that when I saw Homecoming, I had no problem with her being MJ, but the execution of it just being like, oh, by the way, I'm MJ was kind of one of those. It's like, oh, well, that sounds kind of, that feels like the MCU trying to
Like hat
force a little twist. You know, it was like, we know, you know, Benedict Cumberbatch is Khan, but he's like, no, I'm not Khan. And then in the movie, he's Khan. Sorry,
That was
spoilers.
a very apt comparison.
Yeah. And so it was like, my issue was only with the execution, but her being MJ, I was just kind of like, I mean, I would have been fine if you just made her MJ the whole time. Like, and it would have been great because she is perfect in the role. She and Tom Holland are perfect together. That whole, I even want to give a shout out to just the surrounding crew, like Ned, Betty. I love this iteration of Flash. You know, he is absolutely hilarious.
Oh yes, I definitely want to talk about Flash.
Yeah, like they're just
There's a lot to be explored with that one too.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's the whole crew works really well. They feel like school friends. They feel, you know, it's like you can tell like they're definitely a group of friends, but then, you know, someone like Flash, you can tell he keeps his distance of, you know, having to be this person that he's trying to be. But it's like, I feel like we get vibes of him just being like, I feel like you can tell he thinks like Peter Parker's not all bad, but he's, you know, he's gotta just be like, you know, whatever, you know,
you got an image
what
to
up, dickwad?
uphold. Yeah, he's got an image to uphold. And like you said, you know, Ned and Betty's summer fling was just one more
Hilarious.
thing that reminded me of my childhood. You know, it brought me back to like summer camp
babe.
where babe, but like also the fact that at the end they're like, oh yeah, it's over. You know, it's like gone as quickly as it
I love how happy they were.
Sometimes
with
people
that. They're
grow
like,
apart,
oh
Peter."
no, we're not together anymore.
Yeah, it was fine. It was like, but it was, it's just like, babe. And you know, like the scene where she's like, I'd kiss you, but I threw up. And he's like, I think I got a mint. It's like honestly, I know this just like sounds super weird, but like, I remember being a kid and like how, you know, like it was just all of that tugged on the right heartstrings.
It did.
I thought that you're right. Flash, I think we're going to ultimately see more about. I hope we do at least. I really like the kid who plays him too. He's
Same.
been in some other stuff now. Tony. I almost want to call his name. I know I'm going to butcher his last name because it's like Ravioli. I want to say like Ravioli, of course. But
I think it's Revelori.
Revelori. He's
Okay.
great, and I've seen him in some other stuff, but you could tell they started to kind of pull the curtain back on like, oh, is mom not here, to pick me up from the airport or something like that. It's like, okay, why would you do that if not to like, there's been some rumors of like who his parents could possibly be, so there's all sorts of stuff to play with on these other characters, but also the teachers, I'm curious to hear what you guys thought of the teachers and how they interacted with the rest of the cast.
They're so incompetent. It's hilarious.
JB Smoove. JB Smoove.
Yeah.
Witches.
Yeah. Oh,
I got
my
the
goodness.
third shift. I just took an Ambien.
Martin Starr is always hilarious. I can't get enough of him. So
Yeah.
it's like I was super into his. JB Smoove I thought was really funny, but I felt like they didn't give him enough.
They didn't give him enough.
I'm a huge Curb Your Enthusiasm fan, so anytime I see JB Smoove, I'm like, yes.
Yeah, like he nailed everything.
They gave him great lines.
More.
They did give him good lines.
I agree. More
Yeah.
JB Smoove.
Yeah.
Come on.
I'm hoping they have future plans for him.
Yeah, because he was. I mean, they brought Martin Starr back. The teachers
Yeah.
are
He gives such a
obviously
good
working
reaction.
well.
Like, as a reactionary actor, he's perfect.
And they're just
Definitely.
like bumbling adults. They don't even get anything done. I mean, really, like Happy Hogan is the same way in there, but at least he tries. Like they're always just kind of like running for cover.
Oh yeah, they're the worst chaperones ever.
Oh yeah,
They are.
Like, taking
I
them
love
like,
it.
oh yeah, we're gonna take you instead of going to the Festival of Lights, we're gonna go to the opera for 4 hours.
'Cause
But to be serious, as like teenagers, they would have been the best chaperones.
Oh, yeah,
ever
true.
because they would have
Absolutely.
had no grasp on what was going on.
Yeah, I love a through line from Martin Starr's character was in Homecoming when there's the little line like after the thing in Washington where he's like, I'm just glad that everyone was okay and
Couldn't lose another kid.
Didn't lose another kid, not again.
Not again, not
there's-
again.
Yeah, they had this through line of like when Peter shows up, he's like, "Oh, good, thanks. I'm so glad you're not dead." And he's like, "Go, pack and don't die." Like,
Yeah.
it's just-
Nice follow through with that character. And one of the things I don't even think we touched on, but like what about Fury and Hill in this? And obviously we can talk about technically like were they really in this? But
Yeah.
I really enjoyed them, interacting. The scene where Fury's trying to talk to Peter and everyone keeps trying to come into the room. It's like but the great thing about Fury and also, I spoiler obviously at this point, Talos, is they're kind of similar. Like they're kind of similar characters, so I could see a lot of the stuff that Talos is, if he is in fact Fury the whole time, if we're led to believe that, I could see him. And
I
so,
think that's the impression.
yeah, and I like that. I thought that was really good. So I really like the supporting cast did a good job of like adding bits and pieces, but ultimately getting out of the way for people like Mysterio and MJ and Peter.
Yeah, it was nice that was, and I have kind of conflicting feelings on the Skrulls inclusion. So the second time I watched it, now having known that, it kind of bummed me out a little bit that I'm like, oh, all these like fun back and forth that Peter had with Fury, it's not actually with Fury, and it kind of almost like took it down a little bit for me.
I
But
can
at the same
understand that.
time, I love that character in Captain Marvel. He was one of my favorite parts of that movie.
Talos.
And yeah, so it's like I'm also kind of okay with it because it just gave me more with him.
Yeah,
I'm interested to
completely
see
understand
where
that.
it goes at least. But I'm glad that they kept it. It was this background thing, and here's the surprise. But yeah, it's not like this. Here's this additional plot line that's going to take away from everything else that we're focusing on.
I think you're right. It added it. Like, if anything, you're like, oh, you just saw this.
Yeah.
Here's like another nugget for you to like think about.
Exactly. Yeah,
know?
it definitely makes me interested to see where they take it. But it was still it was done well and it was fun. I was glad to get a lot of good stuff with Maria Hill because I feel like she's a character that is pretty cool in the comic books and has never really gotten a true chance to shine in the MCU. So I really enjoyed her stuff.
Did she get any good lines in this one? Because I thought she was like. I mean, I love
When she
Colby
blew up the
Smulders.
drone, and like you said,
Oh,
we'll
yeah.
talk
That's a
about
good moment.
the mid credits and post credits scenes towards the end here to sort
Yeah.
of determine, because
Yeah.
obviously we know the actors are playing the characters, but whether or not the characters are playing the characters is a different thing.
Yeah. I'd
And
love to know if Samuel L. Jackson and Colby Smulders knew.
yeah, that would be interesting. And
That would be really funny, actually. Yeah.
I think what they did a really nice job of with all of these surrounding characters is that they didn't spend too much time on any of them. You talked about Ned and Betty, and they knew that that was something that couldn't extend beyond this movie. It had to be a summer fling, because if they said babe more than they did in this movie in a second movie, that would be too much. And you know,
too much.
And they knew exactly what to do with the teachers, even though we felt like we wanted more of JB Smoove because it's JB Smoove, but they knew exactly who they wanted these characters to be. And Brad was the obstacle. We didn't really talk about him much, but he was, in Peter's eyes, sort of the real life obstacle that he was trying to deal with and accidentally tried to kill. But you know,
that was great.
I almost killed Brad. You almost killed Brad.
And yet MJ, after she basically confirms, she still stands up for Peter, even though Brad's like, but he was in this room with his pants off. And they're like, why are you taking pictures of people in the bathroom, even though it wasn't
their
the
pants
bathroom?
off? That's inappropriate.
And I think JB Smoove like gets to cap it off, and he's like, "Yeah, we got to talk about that. You can't be doing that."
The cool teacher for now. You really got to say that.
Yeah, but before we dive into the mid and post credit scenes, because I know there's quite a bit to unpack with those two things, what do you guys think this story really accomplished? Like I said, we kind of knew that this was going to be a bridge between the events of Endgame and what comes next, but at the same time, it still, for me, accomplished this great story of personal growth for Peter, and a lot happens in this. You know, it's about 2 hours and 10 minutes, and they pack a lot into it. You know, we barely even touched on Happy and Aunt May, which is a whole other thing that Peter's trying to wrap his head around and seemingly can't.
I think this story really dives deep into kind of the outside aspects of Peter's life in regards to like the Aunt May and Happy, and like he's still trying to make it work in school and hide his identity from his classmates, and to the point of creating another identity, the Night Monkey.
Amazing.
You know, like he is really trying to maintain this separation. And as we see at the end, like that's over. That's over for him. And I'm really interested to see what that means for the rest of the MCU. But Peter really is forced to choose in this film in regards to how he deals with his Peter life and his Spider-Man life. And I love that. I love that they're like, well, we're going to force this with you, because the MCU is all about like, well, you can be a superhero or you can be a regular person. Like it doesn't give you the option like the comics do, where you can kind of walk this intangible in between spot. So I'm so excited to see kind of how they handle that going forward.
Yeah, I agree with all that. And I think, you know, it's funny, when I first walked out of this film, I loved it. Don't get me wrong. I still, and it has nothing to do with this film so much as more like I felt like Homecoming was like the first proper Spider-Man I had been given, as far as like him being a kid and you know, getting other kids and not seeing all these adults play kids, and just the curiosity of it all.
High school kids.
Yeah, just like all these things that felt out of place in certain other films. You know, while both other Spider-Man actors in those films have their own good parts, like I felt like that was one of the things that was truly missing. And now seeing it a second time and talking about it, it's like this is like the natural progression. It's like he's getting older. He's got more responsibilities than most kids his age, but he still has to very much deal with all of the same problems that they're dealing with while dealing with all of this other stuff. And I think that's always what made Spider-Man so cool is and unbelievable, is that he had to do all this stuff, whether it was like Tobey Maguire being the pizza boy and the photographer and the other ones, and what you see in the comics. And what I love about this is that even though he's getting older, he's still kind of got this awkward thing about him. Even though he's like a genius in his own right, he still does silly boy things. You know, he's like very much in development and you know, progressing. And I felt like this story did so well and tying a lot of that together. And like Katie said, you know, what we get at the end, it's like, who knows what's next? It has a lot of potential and a lot of possibilities.
Definitely. And so like Spider-Man is hands down, one, at least as far as Marvel, like favorite character in Marvel. And all the other movies the Tobey Maguire ones, they all did certain things well and they worked for what they were, for the most part. And then like the Andrew Garfield one, it's like those like had things that worked really well. Cause then it's like in those ones, that was when I started to feel like, oh, they're getting like visually like the choreography of how Spider-Man flows. Like this is stuff we didn't see in the Tobey Maguire ones. It was like they kept slowly adding things that was like, we're getting there. We're getting there with Spider-Man.
What you knew Spider-Man could be, it's almost similar to the video games, watching him run around versus old versions. You're like, oh,
Exactly.
we're finally getting what we had visioned in our head, hopefully.
Absolutely. And then with Homecoming, I completely agree, Jonathan. Like that was like, even though it added this thing of like, oh, Tony's giving him the suit and stuff like that. So it was like kind of taking away from some of the things that we're used to with Peter Parker. It still felt like the most Peter Parker and the most Spider-Man that we've had so far. And then this one, I think it took it even further. This one, him struggling with being Spider-Man and not being Spider-Man and wanting to live this normal life. I think this movie definitely handled that in some of the best ways that we've seen on screen yet for Spider-Man. And then, any issue of, oh, well, why doesn't he make his own suits or anything? We get that scene and it's like, yeah, he's using Tony Stark tech, but it's this beautiful scene after this great conversation with him and Happy, super emotional. It's like, I'm already eyes watering from the conversation he had. And then he goes and he's working on the suit. And of course, there's the funny joke of he puts the music on and then it's, and it's like, I love Led Zeppelin. And then, but it's like just watching Peter starting to use the tech, and then he like swoops his hand in and it's just like Tony. And then it cut back to Happy and he's got the look in his eye. I'm like, oh, God damn this movie. But then it's like, as he's putting the suit together, you're listening to him be super technical and super scientific about how he's going to modify these things, because he's fought the elementals and everything, and he's fought Mysterio, and he's like, all right, well, these things with my regular webs didn't work, so let's modify these things to combat like what I need to. Like, it's showing his intelligence and his love for science that is so great with him and Tony. And so I really, really enjoyed that. And the fact that it's like this weird like tube that he makes the suit in. Yeah. It's been a long time since I've read the original Secret Wars comic book, but I believe there's just this weird kind of side part in that series where they're on this weird Earth and everything, but there's a machine that they can build their own suits out of, and that's how he gets the black suit for the first time. Nice. And I remember reading it and being like, that's kind of dumb. And but it's
Oops.
But then 3D printing came along, and Tim's opinions had completely changed. No.
Exactly. And then I'm watching this movie, and I'm just like, you know what?
Well, maybe it's
that's
not
brilliant.
so dumb.
I was like, that's, you know what? I thoroughly appreciate this tying this together, and I love it.
And it's one of the things you never really see in the other Spider-Man movies. Like, aside from like a quick montage, I don't think you ever really see a proper like, how does he build the suit? How does he go from making this like crappy suit he wrestled in a ring to like this really advanced suit? Okay, like this was like, I felt like you said, you're right. It's a little different than the source material. Tony giving his tech, but it like makes it almost more believable. Like, absolutely. And it works.
Yeah, it definitely works. And that's something that the MCU, I feel like, has done so well. And you mentioned this earlier, taking the classic things we know, but then modernizing them in just the right way. So it works in the universe, so that it's really easy for me to sit there and be like, yeah, well, who cares that that's not exactly like it, because they did their own take on it. And granted, if I wanted it to be exactly the same, I'll just go read the comic. But it's like you're giving me a little bit of a twist, so I have that added bit of nostalgia of a story I know, but you're giving me something new and fresh. And the biggest thing that I think this movie did was build upon Peter Parker as Spider-Man, and him, when he's fighting Mysterio and I can't believe, I don't think any of us have mentioned Peter Tingle.
Peter Tingle. Oh my God. I'm just
like,
realizing how much good stuff was in this movie just based on how many things we keep forgetting to talk about.
Yeah,
I don't think I want them to keep using that term, though. I
No.
think it's one of
No,
those
they
things.
won't.
Neither.
It's like Betty and Ned, where if they do it
Yeah.
too much, it'll become overplayed pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But it served a purpose in this movie, even if it's just a teeny tiny purpose. And
Yeah.
Tim, I'm glad you brought up everything with the suit, because you have this moment in Homecoming where, Peter has his homemade suit and he's using the resources that he has, and he's going to school and making his web fluid because the school has those resources for him to do that. But it's not a stretch to think that Peter would be able to come up with something much, much better than that homemade sweatsuit that he basically had if he has Tony Stark's resources. He has the brain to do it. We've determined that he is very, very book smart, and, his intelligence goes far beyond just being book smart too. You see his eyes light up when Beck mentions a multiverse, and he just starts rambling on, and everyone sort of turns and looks at him, and he's like, oh, okay, I can see that. And even
never
Beck
apologize for being the smartest person in the room.
Yeah,
And then
and
the follow up, I felt like that was actually one of my favorite Maria Hill moments, where she just is like, okay,
nerd.
I felt like it was almost like, even though like I felt like it almost gave off two impressions. One, that she's like nerd, and then also she's like, you guys think you're the smartest people in the room, basically. But like,
right?
Yeah. Yeah, there were definitely a lot of fun moments, and this story accomplishes a lot in setting up who Peter is going to be going forward. He makes that choice at the end to not just give up and go back to being a normal high school kid. And a lot of that probably has to do with the fact that MJ knows now, and she's very okay with it. She's like, these things would have gone terribly wrong if it weren't for you. And she doesn't have to say that for him to really get that message from her, because she's not the kind of person who's just going to come out and say that. She's probably going to have some snarky remark or something to just kind of get that point across. And, that kind of happens when she runs to go find him, and then she still takes the mace with her, as if that's really going to help her in the bigger scheme of things. But, she's a fighter, like we've said, and there's just so much that I really loved with this story. But I think now is a good time to talk about the mid and post-credit scenes. We've obviously talked about Talos a bit here, and he's with his wife Soren, if I'm not mistaken, in the car at the end there. That's who he's with, and she was the one supposedly, portraying Maria Hill the entire time. So because you have them in this movie, a lot of those things, like the look Maria gives Peter in the base when he, starts talking about the multiverse, Jonathan, you mentioned she's kind of like, yeah, you think you're the smartest person in the room. And that's because, there's so much that humans don't understand within the Marvel universe. It's something that, clearly Peter has an interest in it. So to see those two pop up later on, it was just kind of like, oh, looking back, a few more things make more sense. And especially when Nick Fury hung up on Happy and he was giving him the coded message, Talos was probably like, who is this dude?
Yeah.
What the fuck's going on here?
Yeah, why am I like
kind of
being he's like pulling favors for Fury. It's like you could tell he was there and kind of getting fed up. But I love it. I didn't even think about that, Dan, until you mentioned it. Like, you're right, knowing that she was actually Soren, and they're because I always thought it was just like you guys are like basically like stroking each other's egos right now and rolling my eyes at you. But it's also like an extra layer, because you're right, she's been hiding in space and been like, you guys like think you know everything, but you don't know who I am right now. It's like oh man, that makes it even better for me. But I like that. I did not see that. First off, we can talk about the jokey mid-credit scene first, since we're already talking about this. But I really like Nick Fury in space, that reveal, and
it was so wonderful.
Yeah, and Katie, I meant to ask you, because I had heard something that like it could have been setting up something called Sword, which was like
Oh,
Shield
yes.
That's what
in
I've heard,
space.
too.
It's like Shield in space or something like that.
I haven't heard anything about that. I
Okay.
think it's still really under wraps with Marvel where they're going.
Right.
That's kind of the impression I've gotten from everything I've read, because I've really been trying to stay up to date on, okay, what are they doing with this? And I would guess we probably won't get anything from Marvel until next August at the next Comic-Con.
Yeah.
That's my guess as to when they'll say, here's what we're doing.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
that's like, you mean the one that's coming up? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Like, that's right.
Oh, no, I would guess it'll be the one after.
I don't think
we'll get
I don't think
some.
any of the big studios are doing anything at Comic-Con this year.
Oh,
Nope, I think we'll get something to prepare us for like the February and May release that Marvel will have, but I don't think we'll get anything.
I was hoping we would at least get a slate like they did back when
Yeah.
they revealed the slate.
They might.
Because we know they're filming. I've seen photos of them filming the not Scarlet Witch, Black Widow movie.
Yep.
Which I'm very, very excited about. And
Shang-Chi.
Yeah.
Yep. I think we'll get something.
They do
about
have
that.
quite a few things that it's like people kind of know about, but Jonathan,
The Eternals.
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
Eternals.
That's what's coming
Yeah.
out with
Right.
Angelina Jolie and Kumail Nanjiani.
Yeah,
It is
that-
pretty crazy that this is like, I feel like this is one of the first times in a long time that a Marvel movie has come out and we really have no information on what the next thing
What's
is.
next? Nothing.
Like,
Right?
Aside from Disney
I think
Plus.
they like that.
Yeah.
think
I
they
really
like
like
that
it.
because-
Not knowing the massive slate is
Yeah.
kind of enjoyable and just
I think
along for the
Disney
ride.
Plus isn't coming out till November. And
Yeah.
so I think they are kind of holding everything
Yeah.
in a pattern until then. And then I think in 2020, we'll really get more of a picture of this is where they're going to go.
I'm kind of okay with that, to be honest, because they throw
Same.
so much information at us at once.
I need a
and
break.
We
need a
know
break.
that the Black Widow movie is coming up. We know that they have the Eternals going on, Shang-Chi, and obviously the post-credit scene here, which we should talk about real quick, sets up what's going to happen next with Spider-Man specifically, because his identity is out and they brought J.K. Simmons back as J. Jonah
Yes.
Jameson, which was a very good move for the fans who really liked that character and the portrayal of that character
I almost
previously.
like jumped out of my seat when he popped
I
up.
did not see that coming. I was hoping we would get, J. Jonah Jameson, but I was not expecting that. And I will say the reason it worked for me, because I'm a fan of what Disney's been doing with all of the recasting and rebuilding of these characters. And I was excited to see who they might recast that role as. But the reason I think this works is because they painted it in such an Alex Jones way that
Oh, it was
Yeah.
perfect.
I
That
was like, okay,
perfect.
all right, this works now. This
Yeah.
suddenly worked. Like this character now works in this universe.
Yeah, like it's like, okay, they brought him back, but they didn't bring him back as just exactly as he was. They brought him back because the fans are so closely tied to how much they
portrayal.
love his portrayal of it.
And
And so they're like,
I
we're
think
going to
he
give
really
you a
likes
little bit.
doing it.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, you could tell he's having so much fun. And it's
Right?
like, so it's like, all right, here we're going to throw this for you, but don't worry, we're also not rehashing anything. Like
Yeah,
we're
'cause I
giving
don't
you what
see-
you want, but we're still giving you something new.
I thought the end credits were just so fun. Like,
Yeah.
and that because, with Endgame, there really weren't any end credits. And so
Yeah.
it was like, okay, what are we going to get here? Is Feige done doing this? And then we got to see so much, and it felt like, oh, good.
Things are going to be okay.
Right.
Yeah.
We've got some hints as to what's coming because I want to know. Like I am excited to see what's coming, and I love that J. Jonah Jameson came back and we get to see a little bit of it, but they're still twisting it like we've talked about. Like I think they handled this really well
Yeah.
and gave us perspective without giving away too much.
Yeah, and Tim, real
Exactly.
quick here, you mentioned you were playing the video game earlier today,
Yes.
and I don't have a PlayStation 4, so I haven't personally played it, but when I was editing for a Spider-Man website, I wrote quite a bit about the game and watched the trailers and everything like that. And can you confirm for me, is this version of J. Jonah Jameson that we see in the post-credits kind of like the one that we hear in the video game? Because he has a podcast, essentially, in
Absolutely.
the video game.
It's-
Okay.
This is
Yeah.
like it they literally took exactly how the character is in the video game. The only difference is in the video game you never see him.
Okay.
You
He's just a
hear his
voice.
podcast come
But
up,
that's one
come
of the
up
best
every
parts.
once in a while.
It's one of the best
it's
parts about the
hilarious.
game is you just hear
Yeah.
all these different audio recordings of J. Jonah Jameson, like taking a good thing and then turning it into like,
Yeah,
he's a
It's
mess.
done, yeah, it's done
He's a
so
mess.
well,
That's right.
so well.
And it harkens back to the comics so much too, because when you're reading
Yes.
especially like the original run, Stan Lee's run and everything, he's very much like that. And I love that they haven't really tried to change the character from his roots too much, because he is this crotchety old man, really. And it just works so well.
Yeah, they updated him just enough, but he's still it's still basically the same exact character. They just update his format basically because his format has changed.
Yeah, and I felt like that was coming. I honestly, like, that was one of the things I was like, I could see them bringing him back, but never in a way where Peter's working at a newspaper taking photos for him.
No, yeah.
And like,
They-
and
that-
to be
Yeah, I
fair,
like
we
that they're
haven't
not going that
seen,
way.
we haven't really seen Peter be a photographer in any of these
No,
films.
I don't
I
think
think
so.
that they're just not going to go that
No.
way. I'd feel like it would be more likely we'd see him working with like a Dr. Octavius or something, like
Yeah.
going that route than working for the Bugle. And
Agreed. I could see MJ working for
yes,
Yeah.
a photography thing, because they give that moment of when she sees like the cool thing with the crabs by the water, like her first thing is like, oh cool, and she's like really focusing on
because
getting
she's
a
I
picture.
forget, she a reporter in the video game, like she's
a
always
reporter
in the
crap.
video
Yeah,
game,
so
yeah.
like I could see that happening.
I think that would be a good way to go.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
like
agree.
they could bring.
As the
who knows if
skeptic.
we'll get more of him? Yeah, well, who knows if.
Well, it was going to be interesting to see like these things that were like we could see them, going in this direction, but they all still very much look like they're in high school. So I'm interested
Yeah.
to see how long do they keep them in high school.
I know there's a limit, time limit.
Well, it's like, where do we go from here? Is he on the run? Are they like, is he going to be denying
True.
it in the next film? Like, he can't deny it now because everyone else.
Right? Is he going to take on Iron Man's role?
They can use a scroll to like do like a Superman type thing where it's like, oh look, see, I'm Clark Kent and
Yeah.
you're Superman
Oh, yeah,
standing
true.
here.
I didn't even think about
So
that.
they
Like,
could do something like that, but
I mean, I just can't see him. I mean, well, the thing is, you're right. Like, we only have that footage that he shows off, but like, I don't know. Could we see him? Like, if you had to guess, do you think he's living out in public when we catch up with him next, whether it's in Spider-Man 3 or, whatever? I have a hard time believing we're not going to see him until another Spider-Man movie.
I agree. At least from the stuff that we know is coming up, it doesn't sound like anything that he would be in.
Right.
I'm interested to see definitely where they go with this. My first initial reaction, I was actually mad about it because I was like, the MCU is utterly incapable of having secret identities.
Yeah.
They
It's
really
true.
are.
True fact.
But it was such a big cliffhanger for
Yeah.
where Peter is at in his life at that moment. We get the great
Yeah.
scene with him swinging around town with MJ, and she was like, I'm never doing that again. And
That was such a
loved
great,
that. It was so
such a great
cute.
contrast of like the typical thing of like
Catch her before she falls.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then like, in the old Spider-Man ones or in Superman and stuff, like it's always like
It was like a mode of
flying around is
transport.
That was
amazing.
fun.
Yeah. And so to
Yeah,
see
it's like
it,
a magic carpet
terrifying.
ride.
to see a genuine reaction of just like, that was awful. I don't
And her
want
hair's all messed
I
up.
never want to do that again.
Yeah.
That was awful.
Yeah. And then of course like him going to say like, oh fuck, and it getting
Yes!
cut off
That
just like
was
the
the-
end of Homecoming.
That was
Yes.
perfect.
I loved that. I was just going to say that. Like, that was such a great. I love that they did that.
What
yeah.
Yeah, like it's
Just
great.
perfect.
And shout to just the credits themselves, like the animation stuff they've done with both Homecoming and this are some of my favorite just like credits to sit there and watch.
Yeah.
yeah.
Great.
Really, this
Very
overall
well
was just
done.
a great package. But like, I'm curious to hear like, in this, do you more so see him like living out in public, or do you see him on the run, or do you see it being like Iron Man, where he really isn't like in trouble for anything, but he's on the radar of like everyone in the world now?
I feel like he's gonna have to be in some kind of hiding because
He has to lay low for a while, I think, after
Yeah.
that
Yep.
and figure things out.
I feel like he'll go into the Avengers and like Pepper Potts will, we're just going to cover you with safety.
That's right. I mean, he's like he's got to be protected by
'Cause
like
Pepper
Tony's
knows who he
estate.
is.
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
he's not just being outed, like he's being outed and accused for
Right.
massive
Murder.
drone strike.
Attacked.
Right.
Yeah.
He's being attacked.
Yeah.
This isn't just like, oh, this is who Spidey is. It's much more sinister.
Yeah, which also we were discussing a little briefly. We, kind of hoping that Mysterio, isn't dead, and is he really dead? I feel like the
I have
way
a hard time believing he is.
the way that is done in the post credit makes me feel like he's still alive, and that
he pulled off one last grand
he pulled off
illusion.
one
one
last
last trick.
Yeah, because you even see it's like his one helper from Iron Man 1 who was like manning the computer.
Yes.
Like he packs up the computers and leaves.
Yeah.
So I wonder if it's like, here's our contingency. We meet, here or whatever.
And he did say he had contingencies in place.
Yeah. And he says something the second time I watched it. He says something like after he's like, get rid of the illusion. And he's like, we can fix it. And he's like, people will see you. And he's like, they will see what I want them to see. And then right after he says, prepare my something suit. I forget what he says. And
I think it's like his stage, right? The one that like the woman was like
ironing for him.
Yeah, ironing.
Yeah.
There's a cape coming.
And so I'm just like I wonder if on top of that, like it was like a code to set up the last like illusion that it's like, all right, Peter Parker is gonna think that he's going up against me, but then it's not really me. And his one plan is, he's going to be invisible and try to shoot him. And Peter sees that. But then it's like, there's got to be something more to that. And that scene was so great to see him just like channel and use the visuals of how he did the visuals of Mysterio. Like I feel like we haven't even talked about that really. That whole sequence of his battle with Mysterio, the special effects and the visuals were so cool and so unique. And that's something
funny that he closed his eyes, similar to like Luke and
Yes.
Star Wars,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
like, cut out all the noise because that was the thing he had
And
to.
they mentioned
Yeah.
Star Wars earlier, don't they? Like, you wouldn't get that reference because it's not Star
Because
Wars.
it's not Star Wars.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh man, I feel like his age is always going to be a joke for the other characters that are older than him. Like,
Definitely.
that will always be enjoyable and never get old. But yeah, I do. Also, the one reason I bring him up being alive is we know that Vulture is still alive.
That's true.
And they had rumored that he was going to have like a small part in this. They probably ended up cutting it out of the script or just didn't use what they shot.
It'll be interesting to see what shows up on the Blu-ray too later when they release that. Because
Yeah.
I know they've already mentioned some people getting cut out of the movie entirely, like their scenes in particular, other classmates and things like that. So
Yeah,
it'll be
he's
interesting
also
to see if they have something with the
Yeah.
Vulture later. And, I think the post-credits scene just sets us up for so much uncertainty with Peter. And
In a very exciting way.
yeah, and I
It's
think
different.
we can talk about a little of what might come next because Jonathan, you mentioned this might be setting up Sword, and when we see Nick Fury, we don't really know where he is. We know he's in space, and for anyone who isn't super familiar with this particular agency, it's the Sentient World Observation and Response Department, and they do
love the
have their
acronyms.
headquarters in space. So for all we know, that's where Nick Fury might be, and I know the Skrulls are still looking for a place to live, and they're basically
They mentioned Kree's sleeper cells.
Yeah.
Did you catch that part? I mean, like,
Oh, I didn't catch that.
yeah, when they're walking
missed
and they
that
get a
part, too.
call, they go, "What are you talking about? Like Kree sleeper cells or something?" Like they're talking about, a great one more thing I should shout out. If anyone's checked out New Rock Stars, they do amazing recaps and have really great roundtables as well. But there's a lot of, I'll send the link around, but there is a lot of great stuff with numbers and symbols in this film that we didn't even discuss. But
so
yeah,
much goes on in here.
Yeah, a lot. But yeah, no, I was really happy with it overall. I was very pleased.
They left it open enough to where, unless you have read way more of the comics than Katie and I have, I don't
haven't.
think we'll know exactly
Yeah.
where this is going. Plus the fact that they are pulling from certain storylines in the comics, but not necessarily having them turn out the same way. Civil War did not
Right.
turn out remotely the same as
Nope.
the comic book series. And there's just so much that I think they can do. And a lot of it also hinges on Sony's plans for Spider-Man. We can't
Yeah.
necessarily count on Spider-Man always being part of the MCU, and
Oh,
I hope
God,
Sony
that
keeps
gives
their
me
deal going.
palpitations.
Yeah, because I would think that Sony would see the returns on
Yeah.
Homecoming and this movie and be like, well, we're making money, but they saw the same kind of returns with Venom too, and that's kind of what worries me.
And we
That's
should also
true.
touch on that because John Watts and like the director of Venom have like talked about like, oh, it's like more likely than you think that they'll team up or interact, and I'm just like, oh God, no.
Ugh.
But that's the thing. It's like I will be fully honest. I haven't seen Venom yet, but
It's amazing.
It's not as
and
bad
terrible.
as I'm making it. It's not as
Yeah.
bad as I'm making it out
But-
to seem, and yeah.
but it's
It
like
is
fine.
a good bad movie.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so it's like I feel like if Marvel were to decide, all right, this is a good enough take that we would be willing to assist in like teaming them up, they can
Yeah.
easily course correct and fix certain things.
Agree.
to make a good movie. I mean, it's one
Tom
thing.
Hardy was good.
He is great. It's Tom Hardy. Of course he's great.
It's Tom Hardy.
Yeah, and like the biggest thing I want to continue to see from the Spider-Man movies is like, especially I'm loving that the villains that they're giving us are ones that we haven't really seen. Now that's not to say that I don't want to see, Doc Ock again, or
Right.
Green Goblin again. I'd love to see the Sinister Six. Like, please give me a live
Give us
action
a
Sinister Six.
finally. Yeah.
Yes, please.
I think they're spending a lot of time building up Peter as a character before just throwing him into dealing with someone on the level of Green Goblin and Dr. Octopus.
Yeah.
Because while Mysterio is a big villain and clearly he's a really smart guy, just the nature of how he uses his quote unquote powers is totally different from how truly dangerous Green Goblin and Doc Ock can be, because their brains work the same way that Peter's does, but in an evil way instead. So it's just like, or even the same way that Tony's brain worked, but not for good. And I feel like they should take their time building up to some of his greatest villains. And we have seen some of them, Spider-Man and Batman are two characters that I think, even the Flash, those are some characters that I think have really, really great rogues galleries. And they just need to not waste them all at once. I think spacing it out and using them more sparingly. And, in Homecoming, we saw a lot of villains, but really the Vulture was the only one who played a major role. You had two different Shockers, and you have Matt Gargan in prison, and
Aaron Davis technically he would go on.
And there's so much they can do going forward with Spider-Man's character, because they haven't wasted a bunch of the villains. And it doesn't need to be something as big as leading up to Thanos or anything like that, but I just think you can make these stories happen in a more natural way, instead of just being like, oh, let's just throw everything at him all at once, like some of the other movies have done.
Right.
And
that's why Justice League failed so spectacularly, is we didn't care about any of these characters. We kind of knew Batman. We kind of, and when I say kind of, I mean those iterations of them,
right?
And even that's what a lot of felt bad about Amazing Spider-Man 2 to me.
Yes,
is they shoved all of these bad guys in, or even the last the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man. Even they had, what was it? Venom, they had Sandman.
Oh, you mean the best Spider-Man movie?
Yeah, the best Spider-Man movie, obviously. How could I forget? And you're right, Deanna. I would love to see them build up almost take a reverse approach that we took with the first Avengers film. Is instead of focusing all the good characters, build up the bad characters in the background of these other films, and then have them all come together. Whereas Thanos was one character we were building up to. It's why don't we take all of the aspirations of these other characters and then build them up to be maybe you said, not as big of an Avengers threat level as Thanos was with the Infinity Stones, but definitely it could be a good cap to the next one of the next phases.
And again, it hinges a lot on what Sony does, because so far the villains that Sony has worked with, outside of Venom being more of an anti-hero, they haven't picked up some of the bigger characters like Green Goblin. And, they're working on Morbius and Silver Sable and Black Cat and these other characters that, while they are fun Spider-Man villains, I think, it's one of those things where you can definitely make standalone movies for those villains. And obviously Venom as an anti-hero really, really worked. And while, like Katie said, it's a fun, bad movie,
Yeah.
A good bad movie.
Well, yes,
it is.
And it's a lot of fun because of Tom Hardy. But there are things in that movie that I was like, yeah, I don't really see how just yet they would blend that in with the tone of Tom Holland's Spider-Man. Same with Morbius. It's like, no, I don't think we need vampires in the MCU right now.
No, too much.
No.
Only if it's Taika Waititi.
Yeah, true.
Yeah,
true.
Taika
I would
Waititi
watch
can
that
do
crossover
anything.
in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's the one thing that these movies, as you said, have done really well is developing Tom Holland's take on Spider-Man, developing Peter Parker as a character. So one of the biggest triumphs that I thought that this movie did was, by the end of it, I feel like he's made that choice in as much as he can, that this is the Spider-Man that he's going to be, between him making his suit, between him making his choice with MJ, but to also be Spider-Man, and him honing in on his spider sense, which I think by the next movie, I think he'll be calling it the spider sense. I'm sure there'll be a joke about it used to being called the Peter Tingle and him being like, it's the spider sense. But I feel like it's been this
Spider Sense Mom.
Yeah.
Spider Sense May.
Yeah.
Spider Sense.
Exactly.
We're not calling it anything but.
Yeah. And so I think it was the way you see him acting, at the end when he's swinging around, and we finally get, his version of that great swinging montage that all the other Spider-Man movies end with. I feel like that was that moment of, he's Spider-Man now. Like, it was like he, throughout the past past 5 appearances of him, have been him growing into the Spider-Man that, for all intents and purposes, we know.
Right.
And so I think it's going to be, and then to have that moment of, it's like, oh, well, he's now like Spider-Man. And then to throw the wrench in there of, by the way, he's Spider-Man, but also now everybody knows who he is. So now they have that great way of being like, all right, the next movie, like, yeah, for all we know, he's now grown into being the Spider-Man, but he's now got this new thing that he has to deal with that we've never really seen before in live action.
Eyes on him.
Yeah. And so I think it's going to be really exciting. I can't wait to see what they do with other villains. Keep just being creative and unique with it. And one thing that I would love to see just any superhero movie do more of is, I look back at Nolan's trilogy when they had just like those quick one-off scenes of him like recapturing Scarecrow. Like, I would love to see more superhero movies have the existence of other like supervillains, but you don't have to spend any time on them. Like, it could just be a quick thing of just Spider-Man, thwarting a little crime and them getting arrested. And it's just that small way of building the worlds, but showing that he is active with these other villains, but we don't have to spend a ton of time on it. I feel like a lot of superhero movies tend to feel like, it almost feels like the heroes are just hanging out until the next time a giant massive thing happens. And it's like, I'd love to see that feeling, that this kinetic energy of the universe is constantly going, even in between the movies, that we're not seeing.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I know there are still some things we probably didn't completely touch on, and that's just because there's so much that happened in this movie. But why don't we quickly wrap up with our ratings, let's say, out of 5 stars?
Oh, gosh.
You first, Katie.
Are we doing half stars?
Half stars are allowed.
Oh, yeah.
Are allowed?
It's on Letterboxd. You can do half stars.
I'm going to go on even
my other
further
site,
decibel.
we're not allowed half stars. So I just want to be sure. This is a 4.5 star movie for me. This is so fun. It's not perfect, but it's real close. This is one of the better Spider-Man movies, in my opinion. And I think it's such a good follow-up to Endgame that it deserves that recognition. So yes, 4.5 stars. Come at me, bro.
Yeah, I'm gonna copy Katie because that's I was thinking 4.5 as well, and it's funny when I try and think of like the things that I had problems with. It's hard, but yeah, 4.5 stars. I wouldn't say it's my favorite Spider-Man movie, but that actually goes to Homecoming. But he is my favorite. He continues to be my favorite Spider-Man, and these versions of these characters continue to be my favorite. And I am continuously in awe that I keep falling in love with these characters over and over. There's so much to explore, and I feel like John Watts has just handled. Like, I feel like almost like Spider-Man and John Watts go together, almost like Guardians of the Galaxy and
James Gunn.
James Gunn. Yeah. Like I feel like they, at this point, it's like, I feel like it's John Watts' trilogy. It's his to finish out, if he chooses to do so. And hopefully Marvel, like I said, hopefully Marvel and Disney keep him around, but also I really hope that Disney and Sony continue to have a good relationship, because I've just adored these characters and I want to see more of them. And hopefully this is working out the way Sony wants it to for them. Because it's working out for the fans. It seems to be that it's working out for the fans. But yeah, I'm 4.5 stars, or an A-, if you will. It was a great follow up.
It's a good rating.
It's a good rating. I like the movie.
Yeah, I'm gonna second your nod to John Watts. Just being he's just he's a great and interesting filmmaker. I want to give a shout out to his movie Cop Car that is on Netflix right now. So if anyone hasn't seen that, he did that before all the Spider-Man stuff. I highly recommend it. Great film. It's got Kevin Bacon. You can't beat that. Speaking of, let's get him in to be a Spider-Man villain. I know he was in one of the X-Men movies. That's fine.
Right. Forgot about that.
Nope, it's good.
Yeah.
I approve.
Yeah. So we'll get Kevin Bacon in here and it'll be good. But yeah, no, I really, really like this movie. It's interesting. On my first viewing, I gave it 4.5 stars. On my second viewing this morning, I actually knocked it down to 4. But that's not a detriment to the movie. I do think as a Spider-Man movie, as everything that has to do with Spider-Man, I think is 4.5 stars. I absolutely loved everything they did. I can't believe I got to see a Mysterio live action done so well.
That seems to be the resounding opinion from people. What I take is that they did his character a lot of justice. So it's good to hear that you think that too.
Exactly. Like I really, the twist that they did with it, they just worked so well. And then everything with Tom Holland and Zendaya and just the whole cast was absolutely terrific. And I think the movie did a fantastic job topping off the last phase and kind of keying off potentially some of the stuff in the next phase. And I think where I'm at is that it had a lot of things to handle with all those aspects on top of being a great Spider-Man movie. And I think it did really, really well. It did the best that it could. And my only thing is the scroll stuff I think is like fun, but I don't necessarily know how I feel about it right now. But I do think it's one of those things that, like, when I went back and did my MCU rewatch, there were things that I didn't necessarily love in movies, but having known things that happened later, I now retroactively really enjoy. And I could see myself kind of coming back around on a lot of the scroll stuff in the same way. I feel like once I see where it's going, it's going to bring up that aspect of this movie that I'm gonna be like, oh man, this clicks so much better.
I think, and it's funny you mentioned that, because when Katie and Deanna and I talked about Captain Marvel, we talked about Captain Marvel, right? Or was it just that? No, we did not talk about Captain Marvel. I think we had talked about this in Endgame.
And briefly talked about it, and Katie and I did an episode on Captain Marvel.
We did.
So I think one of the things that Katie and I had agreed on was that we're really excited to see what a second Captain Marvel could be. When you think about, especially when you think about Captain America versus Winter Soldier, Winter Soldier is like really when I fell in love with that character. You know, I really loved him. And Avengers was like the beginning of me really loving that character. And then like Winter Soldier was, the full realization. And I think we're going to get that with Carol Danvers. I think we're going to get that. I feel bad saying this because I actually, even though I really enjoyed Captain Marvel, I feel like it could be, and I thought the directors did a good job, and they'd probably do a good job with the sequel. I feel like it could either do with better writing next time around, or like a slightly better, more compelling story. But given what we had to get up to speed with, and I think that's where I think the scroll might get interesting. The further we get with Captain Marvel, if that means the scroll are involved in some way, I think we're going to get hopefully get more of them and get more to love.
I agree.
Yeah, and I did not have the chance to see this twice yet. So I think, this is one of those movies that would definitely benefit from multiple viewings just to catch all of the little Easter eggs. Like, they had places during the trip that were named after some of the famous Spider-Man writers like Brian Michael Bendis and so on and so forth. So they had these little Easter eggs that I didn't necessarily catch on to because there was so much action going on sometimes. You're like, wait, what's going on here? And that's not why I gave it a 4 out of 5, but I think there were just a few things that I would have liked a little more of. We all agreed that there needed to be more JB Smoove in this. And, I felt like even though the thing with Ned and Betty worked really well, it also made it so that Ned wasn't around quite as much. And I think that is something that, based on what was going on with Peter at the time, I was like, I understand that they're on a school trip and everyone wants to have fun, but Ned was the only one at the time who knew who Peter was out of all the classmates. And he sort of just went off with Betty for most of the trip. And I was like, okay, that's, a thing that does happen in high school. People go off and get boyfriends and girlfriends. And then the ones who don't have one at the time are just like, hi, I still exist. But it wasn't a huge detriment to the movie to where it, curbed my enjoyment of it by any means. So this and Homecoming are both sitting at 4 out of 5 for me. And this one I might enjoy a little more on a second viewing. We'll have to see if I can make it back to the theater for that, or if I just wait until it's out on, Disney Plus or whatever. I don't know how long it's going to take for digital and Blu-ray to come out.
I feel like I can't buy, digital for Endgame comes out at the end of this month, and I'm like actually debating not buying it because now that I know it's going to be, I think all in 4K on, because I buy it all on iTunes.
Yeah.
And the only Marvel film out of the MCU that I have that's 4K is Spider-Man: Homecoming, and that's because Sony puts it out. So Sony decides that they will put their movies in 4K on iTunes, and all of the other ones, Disney is. They make you buy the 4K Blu-rays to get the 4, and I've never done that. So now I'm kind of like, okay, do I just wait for Disney Plus at this point?
Right.
The 4K releases get pricey pretty fast. I think they're all like $30 to $35. And as someone who has AMC A-List, I'm like, but I basically get a bunch of movies for $20 a month. So it like makes it harder for me to want to buy like physical copies. Not to mention I don't have a Blu-ray player or a 4K TV. So, like Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, it was $10 on digital through like Vudu or iTunes or wherever. I was like, yes, this is a price I will pay for a digital movie because you aren't giving me anything other than the file.
That's the thing. I don't like collecting physical media unless it's like a vinyl or a comic book or a book in general. Like,
I have so many books. I can't say that I don't like physical things.
I do like physical things. It's just, I mean, like for movies, it's like if I know that the technology exists where I don't have to collect those things, I'm absolutely. And now, like I said, like I think Disney Plus will be mostly, if not all, in 4K where possible. And so it'll be, but I'm definitely planning on owning or at least having access to all of the Marvel movies in the future.
Same.
For sure. Yeah. Like I'm for physical media, like I'm like Deanna. I have way too many books. I definitely have way too many records.
Oh yeah.
I have way too many movies and video games.
All of those things.
Yeah. What I'm trying to do with like the newer ones with like the 4K stuff, especially when it is like a little more expensive, like I'll get the, the Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It's like a 40th anniversary edition of it or something. So I'm like, all right, well, I'm getting it in 4K, but I'm getting all this extra stuff with it. It's like I rationalize that. I don't think you're going to have that much trouble with Far From Home leaving theaters anytime soon. One of the things I saw just before the podcast was that it broke Endgame's midweek opening record.
Oh, damn.
By, I don't know, like 3 million or something like that. But I was.
It had a
I
couple
couldn't believe
extra
that's-
days, to be fair, too. You know, they opened on a
Yeah,
Tuesday
yeah.
instead of a Thursday.
Yep.
So
I'd be
Actually.
curious. Yeah, I'd be curious how they factor
That in.
those rankings. But it was still crazy to see how much it made. That's I can't. I'm yeah. I mean, I've seen a lot of the Spider-Man movies 3 times in theaters, as I spoke before the podcast. But we'll see. Chances are, I guess I'll probably see this one too. But I need to see Midsommar. So it's
Yeah. We're all going for
So good.
Yeah, and for reference, we are recording this Saturday of the opening week, so you know it has made worldwide 342 million at this point, which is big numbers, and I imagine it's only going to increase because, you know, some people go out of town for a long weekend and aren't necessarily going to the movies. So I understand them wanting to have it open before the holiday weekend because a lot of people do stay home and do go to the movies and things like that. But there are still plenty of people who are either going to see this multiple times or haven't had a chance to see it yet because they had other holiday weekend plans. And, you know, it'll be interesting to see how this shakes out. I don't think it'll touch Endgame in the end,
No
but
No,
you know,
no.
not many movies will.
No, I agree.
Endgame ruined box office. For
I think it
everything.
could. I think it could touch like Captain Marvel
Oh yeah.
potentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
That's all I have in recent memory. To, you know, compare it to.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll do well.
Great movie. People should go see it.
Yeah, everyone go see it.
Yes.
Also, if you made it to the end of this and haven't,
Oops.
Yeah.
Get to it, folks. Get to it.
Yeah. Well, Katie, Jonathan, and Tim, thank you all for joining me on this technically third roundtable episode. I don't know. Katie, our Dark Phoenix episode is a little bit more of a triangle, but anyway,
It's true.
you know, you'll be listening to this one first. And as always, you can find the podcast at Geekdom Pod on Twitter. We're at Welcome to Geekdom on Instagram and Facebook. I have a Patreon link in the show notes if you would like to support the show. If you choose $1 a month, you'll get a shout out on either this podcast or Chat Cemetery or both if I do that and remember. Or there's a $5 tier where you could pick a topic for this podcast. So if you have any interest in suggesting a topic and making sure it gets covered, because I have 8 million topics that I want to cover as well, you can do that at Patreon. And as always, thank you all for listening, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
We did it, everyone.